The reason that we believe Christianity is true is because the answer to 4 questions.
Ask me the questions, Bridgekeeper. I am not afraid.
Hey everyone, JL here, and welcome back to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, I finally get to take a look at Christian apologist, radio host, and author Frank Turek. Turek is also the founder and president of crossexamined.org, a Christian apologetics resource site. However, many will probably know him from the well-publicized debates he had with Christopher Hitchens back in 2008 and 2011, and his book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which he co-authored with the late theologian Norman Geisler. While Turek's book is essentially a compilation of his pseudoscientific claims, arguments from incredulity, and emotional appeals, he has managed to carve out a fairly successful public speaking career delivering seminars based on it. Though he has been knocked back a few times for his persistent promotion of the well-debunked pseudoscience of intelligent design, and his profoundly bigoted views on same-sex marriage. Now in this video, Turek presents 4 questions that he says the answers to prove that Christianity is true. Take it away, Frank.
The reason that we believe Christianity is true is because the answer to 4 questions is yes.
Really, Frank? The answer is yes to all 4 questions? Interesting. And you're positive that all 4 questions are not essentially the same question? Like maybe they're all just variations of, does God exist? And you're just arbitrarily answering yes to justify your narrative. Do you have anything at all that would support those affirmative answers?
How about the first question, does truth exist?
Well, to put it in the simplest of terms, yes, truth does exist. And over time, we have developed strict methodologies and precision models that help us to determine what is true. In a very simple example, if I made the statement, I am wearing glasses, that proposition can be determined to be true. And the truth of that proposition also entails that the statement, I am not wearing glasses, is false.
That's easy!
Oh wait, you're not going to try and get all philosophical about this, are you, Frank? Well, go ahead if you must. I just hope it's not going to be that nonsense where you claim that God is necessitated for things to be determined to be true, just because you've arbitrarily defined your God that way in order to justify your belief in it.
Obviously, you hear people say all the time, there is no truth, or you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative.
No, Frank, that's not what people say. Or at least it's not what they should be saying, because it's extremely ignorant and or deceptive. As demonstrated with that previous simplistic example, truth is that which comports with reality. When people make the argument, I've got my truth and you've got your truth, they're not actually talking about truth, they're talking about their opinions. Because if both parties knew the truth, they would be unable to disagree on what it was. Otherwise, one of them would just be denying reality. And that's because the truth of a state of affairs will always be true regardless of a person's feelings. And no, Frank, the truth is never relative. There's the truth, and then there's people's opinions. And those opinions can be informed by or ignorant of the evidence. But that distinction doesn't change the fact that there's still opinions until they can be demonstrated to be true. Below all that, there's intellectual dishonesty, where fallacies in reasoning are intentionally committed, and far below that, slithering through the viscous detritus of human reasoning, is willful ignorance.
When somebody says there is no truth, you ought to ask that person a question.
Yeah, I'd ask them what they were smoking, because that is the dumbest crap I've ever heard.
You ought to say, is that true?
Well, yeah, Frank, if you're deliberately looking to antagonize them by being a smartass. The best way to respond would probably be a concise explanation of how we determine the truth of a claim, and then a demonstration of that methodology. That way they can take the new information and apply it themselves. But if the aim is to just be a dick, then you do you, Chief.
Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true.
Yes, you're very clever.
In other words, it's a self-defeating claim. Of course there's truth. If there was no truth, an atheist couldn't be right that there was no God.
Well, if there was no means to establish truth, then that would mean no one could demonstrate that they were right on any particular claim that they make. And that would include Christian God claims, Frank, not just claims by atheists. Try and keep it neutral, Frank. We're early in the video. There's no need for shots across the bow just yet.
Careful, you idiot. I said across her nose, not up it. Sorry, sir. I'm doing my best.
So there is truth.
Okay, but the existence of truth claims also secures the existence of false claims. You can't have one side of the coin without the other. Hence why atheists continually ask for sufficient evidence to support the truth claim. And because not all truth claims are equal, not all evidence is equal. As a great man once said when he paraphrased Laplace,
"What counts is not what sounds plausible, not what we'd like to believe, not what one or two witnesses claim, but only what is supported by hard evidence, rigorously and skeptically examined. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence."
Question number 2, does God exist?
okay, here we go. Let's get to that extraordinary evidence we mentioned. Because without that evidence, a yes answer to this question will just be intellectual dishonesty.
There are several arguments for the existence of God.
Ah yes, there are arguments for the existence of God. But a valid argument where the conclusion follows from the premises is not the same as a sound argument where the premises can also be demonstrated to be true. So, Frank, you would have to make a sound argument for the existence of your God. Otherwise, you're just claiming your God exists because your argument happens to have a valid structure.
Let me just give you one. Even atheists today are admitting that space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing.
Why must you turn my office into a house of lies?
No, 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 no. That is a bald-faced lie. It seems even the big bad Frank Turek is not above projecting his worldview onto atheists, then removing that God while simultaneously leaving in everything that is entailed by the existence of the God, and then dishonestly claiming that that's what atheists believe. Something from nothing is a logical contradiction, Frank. No physicist, cosmologist, scientist, or even mildly educated atheist believes that.
Well, think about this, friends. If space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing,
Which they didn't, which is probably why you preface this entire thing with an if, in an obviously desperate attempt to sound like you're being intellectually honest, and avoid making a claim about reality that you can't substantiate.
whatever created space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time.
That's not necessarily true, because our current observable universe could very well be a result of the collapse of a previous universe just like it, meaning the death of one universe gives rise to the conditions of the next. There are many hypotheses regarding the state of things that led to the origin point of observability for our universe. We may figure those things out tomorrow, next year, or maybe never, but that doesn't matter, because to assert that the universe is created implies the existence of a creator, which is just your means of smuggling a god into the conversation. This is why we often say that the visible universe is the result of a natural, unguided process. It's an appropriate conclusion from the evidence we currently have access to, and it ensures that we don't saddle our hypotheses with unverifiable baggage like God claims.
Now, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God.
Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, Frank. That's just you defining your God into existence.
Now, we don't know it's the Christian God at this point, but we know it's a theistic God, a being who's beyond the world, who created the world.
That's actually two assumptions. First, it's the assumption of the existence of a deity, specifically a sufficiently powerful entity who kicked the football on the universe and then pissed off, leaving no evidence of its existence. And the second assumption is that this proposed deity possesses specific attributes. Unfortunately for you, Frank, the existence assumption is completely unfalsifiable, and those specific attributes you claim this deity has can only be justified through an emotional appeal. In essence, they're attributes that were specifically chosen because they happen to make you feel better about your very tiny place in the universe. You still have yet to actually demonstrate that this thing exists, Frank. And even more interestingly is that you have yet to demonstrate that the natural processes by which everything formed, a conclusion, by the way, that is backed by all the evidence, was not the process by which this unfalsifiable entity created everything. Because you refuse to recognize, Frank, that these two concepts are not mutually exclusive.
The third question is, are miracles possible?
Oh, I'd very much like to hear what your definition of a miracle is. And of course how, by the particular definition you use, you think it entails that your particular God exists.
Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible.
that's not entirely accurate because Christianity is not predicated solely upon the purported miracles or resurrection of Jesus Christ, but more on the totality of the message, the new covenant he supposedly brought to the people. All of the claimed miracles, including the resurrection, were really just the exclamation points used to drive that message home. Because if someone comes along and asks you to believe in something, and it also happens to be that this individual is capable of breaking the laws of reality at will,
Phenomenal cosmic power!
then it stands to reason, whether out of awe or abject fear, that you might want to listen to what this person has to say. So no, Frank, just claiming or even arbitrarily defining a miracle as a currently unexplainable event does not entail that your God exists or that Christianity is true. But it is an attempted psychological manipulation of your followers. Because if you pin the existence of miracles to the truth of Christianity and by extension the existence of God, and your definition of a miracle is just vague enough to apply to any rare event that has a subjectively beneficial outcome, then any random event that happens to work out in someone's favor can be interpreted as a miracle. Thus, everything that was dishonestly pinned to that particular definition can be interpreted as true by extension.
I fear you're underestimating the sneakiness, sir.
But the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. What's that?
Oh, this should be good.
I just mentioned it. The creation of the universe out of nothing.
But we know that's not what happened because something from nothing is a logical contradiction. The Bible itself literally claims that God magic done it. That's not a miracle, that's just a claim born out of human ignorance. I'm gonna guess, Frank, that this video wasn't crafted for anyone with a rudimentary understanding of cosmology to critique, was it?
If Genesis 1:1 is true,
which it isn't, and we know for a fact it isn't. But what I find really weird is the huge if that you just stuck onto a fundamental aspect of your own worldview. Because for you, Frank, it's not an if. You believe it actually happened. Now, I completely understand, Frank, that you want your terminology to give the appearance of intellectual honesty. But the fact that you are arguing from a position that you don't accept just so you can look better exposes your dishonesty.
every other verse in the Bible is at least possible.
Also a separate claim, which is why we approach them independently. Because even if a god did in fact create everything in 6 days with its super god magics, would not entail that an old man summoned up 2 bears to maul to death 42 children for making fun of his baldness, or that there's a 7-headed dragon under the sea waiting patiently for the pistol shot that will kick off the end times.
Because if there's a being that can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants inside the universe? If he can create the whole show out of nothing? Of course.
Yeah, but are you going to address how incredibly problematic that is? If this entity can do whatever it wants, break the fundamental laws of reality at a whim, then the existence of this entity would logically entail that truth is illusory. Because then what we would normally consider to be true would actually just be whatever that god desires it to be at any given moment. Given that it can change anything it wants at any given time for any given reason. Truth would literally become this entity's opinion. So Frank, in the same breath that you asserted that this thing actually exists, you've also contradicted the affirmative answer that you gave to the first question.
Good job, little buddy.
He can resurrect Jesus from the dead, or walk on water, or part the Red Sea. He can do any of that.
He could reverse gravity, shift the fundamental forces, go bowling with galaxies, or unmake existence. Regardless whether you believe that this entity would or would not do any of these things, all of them are possible if this entity exists. But don't think for a second, Frank, that the reason you push this particular narrative is lost here just because I happen to be an atheist. If this entity was actually demonstrated to be a thing that exists, then ostensibly everyone on the planet would be left in a persistent state of existential dread and despair. Because who knows what could set this big baby that won't talk to us off at any moment, resulting in it unmaking or remaking us however it wants if it gets a particular hair across its ass. And that persistent state of existential dread and despair leaves people open to manipulation and exploitation, which is precisely how Christianity likes its new meat, vulnerable and trembling in fear of the unknown. This particular brand of fear-mongering is just one of the ways Christianity sells its grift.
So the final question, the fourth question, which gets us all the way to the Christian God is the New Testament reliable enough to show us that Jesus rose from the dead?
Well, that answer is easy, and it's no. Because the New Testament is mostly a collection of third-party anecdotes, poetic parables, and biased historical interpretations. There is insufficient evidence to conclude that Christ existed as depicted in the Bible, or that he was even crucified in the manner depicted. Now, is it possible that there was an itinerant rabbi who wandered around Iron Age Palestine, preached heretical teachings, pissed off the leadership, and was summarily executed for it? Certainly, that is well within the range of possibility and probability. I mean, crucifixion was pretty much the way Rome handled troublemakers back in the day. But that doesn't entail that the resurrection actually occurred, and there's no evidence to support that such an event would even be possible outside of the assertion that God magic done it.
The reason we believe in Christianity is because an event occurred, the resurrection.
Positive claim. Now demonstrate how you know it to be true without begging the question.
Now, I have to ask you this. Why would the Jewish writers of the New Testament, all were Jewish with the exception of Luke, why would they invent a resurrected Jesus?
To give the cult that they were associated with more validity by claiming its leader was the fulfillment of a prophecy that they all had previous knowledge of. And quite possibly an attempt to strike fear into the heart of the Pharisees, and possibly the Roman Empire. I remember reading about the ripples that were sent through the Roman Empire as the resurrected Jesus walked up and stood right in front of Pontius Pilate himself, who then in awe at this demonstration of the truth of Jesus' God, then ferried him straight to Rome so that the Senate could see and hear this miracle for themselves, and then every scribe in Rome interviewed and collected Jesus' account so that the Roman Empire, arguably the most influential civilization that ever existed, would spread the truth of this message far and wide, directly from the Savior's mouth to our ears. Oh wait, that's not what happened at all, is it? Because it certainly would have made these claims a lot easier to accept if it had.
Why would they say that a man who claimed to be God rose from the dead if it didn't happen? They thought that would be blasphemy for a man to claim to be God.
Because irrational beliefs often lead to irrational behavior. I mean, the members of the Branch Davidians legitimately believed that Koresh was the Lamb of God, and they went straight to their graves believing it. It's not like you're asserting an impossible scenario here, Frank.
And why would they invent a resurrected Jesus? They already thought they were God's chosen people.
Cults generally start up as offshoots of other faiths, and Christianity is no different. It's rooted in Second Temple Judaism. Jesus was supposedly delivering the new covenant from God, and those who were dissatisfied with Second Temple Judaism followed him for what they thought was a better message.
They had no motive to invent a resurrected Jesus.
They did have a motive, to give their new cult validity by claiming their leader fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. A prophecy, by the way, all of them were intimately familiar with.
And certainly they could not have invented it in Jerusalem, where an empty tomb existed.
Why not exactly? The place of its potential invention is arbitrary, and it doesn't eliminate the possibility that it was pure invention. And you haven't yet eliminated the possibility that his body was stolen and hidden away to make it look like he was resurrected. You only claim this stuff is true, Frank, because you want it to be true. It's an opinion that makes you feel better about your place in the universe, nothing more.
In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection.
And that is a positive claim that you can't back up with anything other than anecdote. And sorry, Frank, that is insufficient for such an extraordinary claim.
The resurrection created the New Testament writers.
Same problem still exists.
There would be no New Testament if it wasn't for the resurrection.
Not necessarily, it just wouldn't have a crucifixion in it. Jesus could still have spread his message far and wide. Claiming that the spread of his message necessitated his execution is just a non sequitur.
Now, even if the New Testament never existed, Christianity would still be true.
That's a bold statement.
Why? Because Christianity is based on an event. The resurrection.
An event you cannot claim happened as depicted without begging the question. Honestly, you're all over the place, Frank.
Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line in the New Testament was ever written?
Yeah, arguments from popularity are not going to help your case, bud.
Why? Because an event occurred. the resurrection.
Claim upon claim upon claim upon claim. I'm going to assume that you have no sufficient evidence to provide, do you, Frank?
You have to have more faith to believe it didn't occur than it did.
Oh yeah, can't forget to plug the book, can we? Oh, and Frank, atheists don't use faith for anything. You are dishonestly conflating faith with confidence in order to project your worldview onto us. But don't worry about it, we're used to it at this point.
And if God exists, and he does, and can create the universe out of nothing, then he can certainly resurrect Jesus from the dead.
Yeah, but these are all claims you haven't substantiated, Frank. Obviously, this video wasn't made for atheists to critique, but it was made as a means to keep followers from straying from the faith. And we can conclude this because Frank hasn't brought anything new to the table for atheists to address. And he himself hasn't even addressed the very first problem. How do we know this claim of Christianity to be true? Maybe one day he will, but I seriously doubt it.
That's why we believe in Christianity.
Yeah, and it's not only a terrible reason to believe in Christianity, but it's also a terrible reason to believe in anything. In the end, for all his pomp and book sales, Frank Turek brings nothing but logical fallacies and emotional appeals to defend his God. It's nothing new, of course, but I did want to showcase how it's not just casual theist YouTubers who are making these mistakes, but it's also the people who have managed to turn their version of Christianity into their own cottage industries. The only differences are that people like Turek have the vocal ability, the practice talking points, and the natural presence to successfully sell the performances of their fallacious reasonings and bad arguments to the victims that they're targeting. It's what truly separates the casuals from the pros in the snake oil confidence game. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, December is HIV/AIDS Awareness Month. A link on how you can support these efforts is down in the description. And if you love scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at the Week in Horror podcast, now in its 4th season. Everything you need to become a channel member here, get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear, or support the podcast is down in the description. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support. And as always, be safe, be excellent to each other. And together, we can bridge the divide.